Very weird. She's doing a CIA informational video.
Weird.
Like an acting gig, or is this something else?
Perhaps. Or,
I know,
but even so, you're doing an acting gig for the CIA. Who calls you for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Erika Kirk stepped straight at Joe Rogan, and the whole move flipped fast because Joe fired back with what people online are calling one of the biggest public callouts she's faced so far. On one of the largest podcasts in the world, he started talking about alleged handler-style training and rumored intelligence ties. And that instantly pushed the story into overdrive. Instead of a calm breakdown, receipts, or a point-by-point response to the claims, chatter around the situation says the response coming from her side sounded more like a warning than a rebuttal. What's being repeated across discussion threads is simple. Joe Rogan could supposedly risk his podcast if he keeps digging into her. That's the line people keep quoting, and it sparked a bigger question that's now everywhere. Who exactly does Erika Kirk think she is? And beyond that, people are asking who might be backing her, who's funding things, and who would give someone the confidence to hint that one of the biggest independent media platforms could be in danger just for asking questions. That kind of bold energy doesn't usually come out of nowhere, and viewers immediately notice the tone. Critics say that doesn't sound like someone just running an organization off a personal legacy. It sounds like someone who believes they've got serious protection behind the scenes. The language feels calculated, confident, and heavy, and that's exactly why the story keeps gaining traction. Meanwhile, Joe Rogan doesn't look like he's slowing down at all. If anything, he's leaning in harder and pulling more threads. He even described himself as going down the Erika rabbit hole. And now the situation is getting louder because Candace Owens is digging into the same story from her own angle with her own sources. When two of the biggest independent voices start circling the same topic at the same time, the spotlight gets intense fast, and that's exactly where the situation is. Heading right now. That overlap, even if it isn't coordinated, and even if both of them are just following the same trail separately, creates a level of pressure that Erika Kirk's narrative control simply can't contain. When two major voices start circling the same questions, the spotlight gets hotter, the clips spread faster, and every detail gets picked apart in real time. The episode that pushed everything into sharp focus featured comedian Mark Norman sitting with Joe, and the tone shifted immediately. Up to that point, Joe had been careful, mostly observational, staying just outside the blast zone after the controversy that followed Charlie's death. But this time, that restraint disappeared, and the conversation went straight at the center of the story. Joe and Mark openly described Erika's public persona as strange, and they discussed rumored intelligence ties with a bluntness that instantly sparked a wave of reactions online. They also pointed out a specific on-camera quality that viewers had been noticing for months but couldn't quite explain. And once it was said out loud, the clips started circulating everywhere. Joe described the eye behavior as unsettling, and that phrasing caught attention fast because many viewers said they had picked up on the same thing during interviews. People pointed to moments where her gaze looked unusually fixed and intense, creating a feeling that seemed different from typical emotional reactions. Once that observation entered the conversation, it gave audiences a way to describe the unease they had already been discussing across comment sections and forums. It doesn't seem to shift naturally with the flow of conversation, and it doesn't soften or tighten, depending on what's being discussed, the way people usually expect from normal emotional reactions. In certain clips, the gaze appears steady and intense, even when the tone of the discussion changes. And that contrast is exactly what keeps fueling speculation across comment sections and reaction videos. The explanations being thrown around are all over the place, and they range from simple to far more complex. Some people argue it could just be nerves, the kind of habit that develops when someone spends a lot of time on camera while trying to carefully manage how they come across. Others say it might come from performance coaching.
Duck.
She's a kook for sure.
You ever seen the compilation of her making crazy eyes?
No.
There's a video of her making demon eyes, and every time she makes the eyes, the music...
where specific eye contact techniques are taught to project confidence. But under certain lighting or camera angles, the result can look unusually rigid. Then there are viewers who push into deeper territory, pointing to psychological conditioning theories and referencing documented training frameworks that critics claim can create similar patterns in behavior. And some simply land on the same reaction Joe described, that it doesn't match what they personally recognize as typical, and the feeling comes across as off in a way that's hard to explain clearly. At the same time, it's important to underline that the more extreme claims floating around online have not been independently verified. Right now, what's driving the conversation is interpretation, clips, and audience reactions, not confirmed conclusions, even as the debate keeps getting louder. The consistency of people noticing the same detail and reacting to it with the same kind of discomfort is what keeps the conversation alive. It's not just one group repeating it, and it's not limited to a single platform. Viewers across different spaces are pointing to the same thing, describing the same uneasy feeling, and arriving at similar observations on their own. Supporters of this view argue this doesn't look like a coordinated pile-on from critics searching for something to attack. Instead, they say it appears more like a spontaneous reaction spreading across comment sections, clips, and reposts, with people independently highlighting the same moments. That kind of convergence gets attention fast, even though what it actually means is still being debated heavily. Then Joe pushed the discussion further by referencing specific promotional videos Erika appeared in, which some viewers describe as having an intelligence-adjacent style. These weren't framed as typical political interviews or standard movement-style promos. Instead, people pointed to a controlled delivery, tight scripting, and a polished visual tone that stood out compared to more casual political content. Some commentators, including those who claim familiarity with structured media production, said the presentation looked unusually deliberate in pacing and tone. Joe's point wasn't just that the videos looked odd. He focused on how the delivery, structure, and visual choices combined into something that viewers felt was unusually calculated. And that's what kept the discussion growing. He wasn't just reacting to how the videos looked. He was asking the deeper structural question underneath it all. Out of everyone available, out of all the people who could have filled that role with that exact tone and delivery, why was Erika the one selected? What specifically made her the right fit for content with that kind of controlled style and tightly managed presentation? Because casting decisions in productions like that usually aren't random. They're typically deliberate choices made by people who know exactly what they want on screen and why they want it. That's why the selection itself became part of the discussion, with viewers asking what qualities made Erika stand out for that particular material and that particular messaging. Then Joe reportedly used the word that has sparked the most backlash in this entire conversation: handler. According to online chatter and commentary, that label drew a strong reaction, far beyond the typical pushback someone might give when they feel mischaracterized. The term quickly became the focal point, spreading across clips, posts, and reaction videos as people debated what he meant and whether the description was fair. Some reports claim her side pushed back hard, allegedly asking for the label to be removed and warning that continuing to use it could escalate the situation. Those claims themselves fueled even more attention, because the stronger the reaction appeared, the more people started dissecting why that specific word hit such a nerve. What used to sit on the fringe of online speculation has now moved into wider conversation spaces, with more commentators discussing the idea openly. Supporters of the theory say it's gaining traction across multiple platforms and communities, making it harder to dismiss outright, while critics argue the claims still rely heavily on interpretation rather than confirmed facts. The people pushing the theory often point to what they describe as overlapping details, timelines, and presentation choices, saying those patterns deserve closer scrutiny as the debate keeps expanding. Supporters of the theory point to what they describe as overlapping details in Erika's background, her connections, her timeline, and the speed of her rise into leadership of a major conservative political organization. They argue that taken together, those elements look unusually smooth, and that's why some commentators claim the pattern deserves closer examination rather than being dismissed outright. From that perspective, They say the combined overlaps feel more cohesive under their interpretation than under simpler explanations. Critics strongly disagree and argue the claims rely on speculation. But the debate keeps growing because both sides are using the same public moments to argue completely different conclusions. Another major focus has been how the response to the theory is being interpreted online. Some commentators argue that when a claim is false, the typical reaction is a direct rebuttal with documentation and clear counterpoints. Others push back and note that legal or reputational responses are also common when public figures feel mischaracterized, especially when allegations spread quickly across platforms. Still, critics of Erika's response say attempts to discourage coverage, along with warnings about consequences, appear more focused on limiting discussion than addressing the substance of the claims. Supporters counter that protecting reputation is standard practice and doesn't imply anything beyond that. The disagreement over what the response means has become just as central as the original claims themselves. Candace Owens then entered the conversation with her own interpretation, responding to a paid account on X that labeled Joe evil for allegedly mocking Erika. Candace argued that framing his comments as mockery was a strategic move designed to shift perception and discourage further discussion. According to her take, rebranding criticism as cruelty creates social pressure, and that pressure can push people to back away from the topic entirely. She also argued that Joe Rogan's staying power comes from the idea that his commentary mirrors what regular people are already thinking, not what a polished PR campaign tries to push. That distinction, according to her, is exactly why the Erika situation intensified the moment Joe started discussing it publicly. Once he engaged, the conversation didn't just grow. It shifted into something much harder to dismiss. It's not only about the massive reach of his platform, even though that alone is huge. The bigger factor, as she framed it, is the social permission his attention creates. When Joe Rogan treats a topic as worth digging into, millions of listeners interpret that as validation that their own questions aren't out of bounds. That kind of signal can move a conversation from niche speculation into mainstream debate almost overnight. For those trying to keep the Erika discussion categorized as fringe chatter, that shift is seen as a serious problem. Once the topic moves into broader public conversation, it becomes harder to contain, and more people start examining clips, statements, and timelines for themselves. Candace also addressed the CIA-related speculation directly on her own platform. She argued that the response from Erika and Turning Point to the promotional video controversy focused less on offering a detailed alternative explanation and more on discouraging the questioning itself. According to her interpretation, the strategy appeared aimed at reframing the act of asking questions as inappropriate, which she says changes the tone of the entire debate. The argument, as she framed it, was that questioning those videos was being turned into a social risk. Anyone raising concerns, she suggested, was quickly labeled as paranoid, conspiratorial, or unstable, which can discourage people from speaking up at all. In that framing, the pressure isn't just about the claims. It's about making the act of questioning feel unacceptable. Candace argued that, in her view, that approach doesn't look like a straightforward rebuttal. She suggested it functions more like narrative control, where the focus shifts from addressing the substance to discrediting the people asking questions. Critics push back on that interpretation, but the framing itself sparked a major wave of discussion across platforms. Then she highlighted a research thread that triggered one of the biggest reactions in the entire story. She focused on Erika's educational background and the institutions connected to it, presenting claims that some intelligence-related entities allegedly had ties to the broader environment around where Erika studied. That claim immediately intensified debate because it introduced a timeline that reached much earlier than previous speculation. According to that line of discussion, the question became whether her path developed naturally over time or whether influences were present much earlier. These claims remain unverified, but they gained traction quickly because they added another layer for commentators to analyze. The institution repeatedly mentioned in this conversation is the Tesseract School in Arizona. Another detail that caught attention is that it was previously called the Looking Glass School, a name that some online observers highlighted while connecting broader threads. That naming detail circulated widely and became another talking point as the debate kept expanding. In the storyline, the name Looking Glass isn't being treated as random or just a quirky label. Commentators following the thread say the phrase has appeared in discussions tied to intelligence history and psychological research, and because of that, they view the naming as potentially meaningful. The fact that an educational institution connected to Erika's early life reportedly used that name is being discussed as a notable detail rather than a coincidence. According to Candace's research, the school wasn't framed as a conventional private academy. Instead, it was described as an experimental educational environment built around psychological development methods designed by professionals in that field. That alone made it stand out. But the discussion intensified when she pointed to a personal link within the leadership structure connected to Erika's family background. One of the psychologists involved was identified as Dr. Jerry Fran, described in the discussion as the first wife of Erika's father. That connection, if accurate, means the environment shaping Erika's early education wasn't just unusual, it was also personally tied to her family circle. Critics say that raises questions about how she ended up in that specific setting and whether the placement was intentional or simply circumstantial. From there, Candace introduced a comparison to MK Ultra, but she framed it explicitly as speculation and a question, not a conclusion. Even so, the reference landed heavily with audiences because MK Ultra is a documented historical intelligence program involving psychological experimentation. Bringing that history into the conversation added weight, even though no direct connection was established. The broader point being debated is whether programs with similar structures could exist in different forms under different names. That idea has circulated in research communities for decades, and once it was brought into this discussion, it amplified interest fast. Supporters say it opens new angles to examine, while critics stress that historical parallels alone don't prove anything. And that distinction has become a major part of the ongoing argument. Candace applied that framework directly to the type of educational environment Erika reportedly grew up in, and that's where the discussion became especially provocative. She argued that the connections she was pointing to weren't just abstract ideas, but specific relationships and institutional ties she believed deserved closer scrutiny. Whether people agree or not, that framing pushed the conversation into deeper territory fast. Then another name entered the spotlight: Nancy Gerard. Candace highlighted her presence at the Tesseract School during the period Erika was reportedly enrolled, describing it as a significant detail. According to the claims being circulated, Nancy wasn't presented as a typical educator with a standard background in child development or classroom instruction, and that distinction immediately drew attention. The background outline for Nancy was described as heavily connected to military environments and institutional networks beyond private education. Candace pointed to her father, Colonel Paul Tracy Gerard, who reportedly served as Chief Military Law Enforcement Officer for the 7th Army in Stuttgart, Germany. That role carried substantial responsibility within a major Cold War-era command, which is why commentators flagged it as noteworthy. Additional claims in the discussion say Colonel Gerard was affiliated with Freemason organizations, including the Scottish Rite and the Blue Lodge. Those affiliations are being treated by some observers as relevant to broader network discussions, while others argue such memberships are common and don't imply anything unusual. The disagreement over how meaningful these ties are has become part of the larger debate. Candace also referenced Nancy's brother, who was described as having involvement in an elite military honor society, often associated with leadership networking. On top of that, Nancy's first husband was reportedly a lieutenant in the United States Air Force, adding another layer of military connection within the family circle. Taken together, Supporters of this line of inquiry argue the environment surrounding Nancy appeared deeply rooted in military institutional culture across multiple relatives. Critics counter that professional or family. Military backgrounds are not uncommon and shouldn't be treated as suspicious on their own, but the connections themselves continue to fuel discussion as the story expands. From there, the discussion shifts to what all of these overlapping connections are supposed to imply, and that's where the narrative gets even more heated. Supporters of the theory argue that when you stack family ties, institutional environments, and early educational influences together, the pattern starts to look intentional rather than accidental. Critics push back hard, saying this kind of stacking can create meaning out of unrelated facts, but the debate keeps gaining momentum anyway. Commentators following this thread say the key issue isn't any single detail by itself, it's the accumulation. A military-connected family here, an experimental school there, unusual media appearances later. Each element on its own may be ordinary. But some observers argue the combination feels unusually aligned, that interpretation is exactly what keeps people digging deeper and replaying old clips with fresh eyes. Others warn that this kind of pattern building can easily drift into speculation if it isn't grounded in verifiable evidence. They point out that many people grow up around military families, attend alternative schools, or later enter political media without any hidden explanation. That counter-argument has become just as prominent as the original claims, creating a split conversation happening in parallel. Still, the reason this story keeps spreading is the timing. As more figures with large audiences discuss the same details at once, the conversation jumps from niche threads into mainstream independent media. Once that happens, every past interview, every photo, and every timeline detail gets re-examined. And the pressure around the narrative increases fast. And once that level of scrutiny kicks in, the conversation usually shifts from background details to motive. People start asking not just what the connections are, but what they could realistically mean in practice. That's where commentators begin tying the discussion back to Erika's rapid rise and the discipline of her public messaging, arguing that both appear unusually polished for someone who entered the spotlight so quickly. Supporters of that view claim the consistency in tone, delivery, and positioning across interviews looks highly controlled. They point to moments where responses appear carefully structured, suggesting media coaching or strategic preparation. Critics counter that anyone stepping into national politics would naturally receive professional guidance, and that polished messaging is standard, not suspicious. Another angle gaining traction focuses on how quickly the controversy itself escalated. As soon as larger voices amplified the topic, clips resurfaced, timelines were mapped, and older appearances were reanalyzed. That rapid resurfacing created the impression of a story that had been quietly building before suddenly breaking into the open. At the same time, others argue the speed of amplification says more about modern media dynamics than anything else. When multiple high-profile commentators discuss the same person, algorithms push the topic everywhere, making it feel bigger and more coordinated than it actually is. That tension between organic curiosity and amplified speculation is now at the center of the debate, and it's what keeps the story moving forward. At this point, the story has moved beyond a single claim and turned into a full-scale debate about perception, influence, and how narratives take shape online. Supporters of the theory say the overlapping timelines, media appearances, and institutional connections deserve deeper investigation. Critics argue the entire framework is built on interpretation, and that none of it confirms anything on its own. That split is exactly why the conversation refuses to fade and keeps resurfacing with every new clip and every new reaction. What makes the situation different is how many major voices are now circling the same questions at the same time. When figures with massive audiences start examining the same details, the pressure grows, and the discussion expands far beyond niche corners of the internet. Every statement gets analyzed, every past appearance gets replayed, and the narrative keeps evolving in real time. Whether this all leads to concrete answers or just more speculation, one thing is clear: The spotlight isn't going anywhere. The more people dig, the more angles emerge, and the more the debate intensifies across platforms. This story is still unfolding, and the next development could shift the entire conversation again. If you want more breakdowns like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe for future updates, share this with anyone following the story, and drop your thoughts in the comments below.